how could we do it? Um, how could men go up a hill and face some enemy fire? In war or in a battle, uh, most time the soldiers don't aim. The enemy's moving around, so you just spray. Machine guns just spray, and the individual soldiers just shoot. So you don't really have any idea where you're going to get shot, or this guy next to you is going to get shot, or where you're going to get shot. It's like a matter of luck. So it's hard to get yourself to go up a hill in the face of something like that. You can't really protect yourself. And why would men go up a hill in face of that kind of fire? Well, I claim that they went up the hill not to save their country, and they didn't go up the hill because they hated the enemy. They went up the hill because of camaraderie. The soldiers that they were with lived very close together. Lived 24 hours a day. You're with these men, and you have to be respected. You have to face them, and they have to face you. Might say the greatest critic is the guy next to you and yourself. So if they go up a hill and you don't, the next day, how are you going to face those men? They're all going to know. There's no way to hide. There's no way to avoid it. You have to go if you're going to gain their respect. After you've been through an ordeal and you all measured up, you would sit on a hillside, and you didn't talk about the fighting that just took place. You kidded and joked with one another about somebody being a redhead and somebody else from Texas. But there was a camaraderie there. They respected you and you respected them. And you gotta have that.
These men are aviation cadets. A short while ago, they too were average American boys from average American families. In the near future, they will have learned many things. If you're 17, you can enlist in the Air Corps Reserve. You'll be called to training soon after your 18th birthday. Men between the ages of 18 and 26 can go into training immediately. There are things to do and places to go, and the Army Air Forces will supply both to healthy, adventurous, and patriotic young men with a will to smack the enemy where it hurts the most.
Want to be an airman right now? That's what they said. Want to be an airman? It was put to us just like that. We were a huge group of newly commissioned officers right out of college. Fort Bragg, North Carolina was our first assignment. We were all artillery and a bunch of really excited kids. Our eyes were shining with excitement. This was it. What we all wanted to graduate for. This was the great adventure. And it sure was.
May 1942, we could hardly contain ourselves, getting ready to go over and join the fight. Just kids we were, in the barracks. Where you from? Ohio State, Notre Dame, Indiana, Purdue, Kentucky. All over the country, we were all making new friends every day. On a Saturday morning, we all gathered to take a battery of written tests. There must have been 500 of us. When we completed, they told us that they had a surprise for us. 4 young Air Corps pilots stepped up in front of us, combat pilots with medals all over their chest and those big wings. One had 9 kills, another had 5 over London. They gave us a short patriotic speech. Recruiters? Yes, that was their purpose. In keeping with that corps, they put it to us fair and square.
All right, here's your chance. Right now, this minute. You want to be an airman? Get up right now and come with us. We'll go to Building 4 and sign you in. Come on, step forward now. I'm stunned. They're getting up. Piles of them. Looks like almost half. I'm sitting there. Should I go? I wait. I'm leaning forward on my seat. I promised my mother I wouldn't fly, but there's a very strong pull here. Now they're all walking out. I sink back into my chair. The decision's been made. The hysteria has passed. I will keep my promise.
The Air Corps wanted men, wanted them badly. And a lot of my friends volunteered and went into the Air Corps. But I had made my mother a promise. Somehow she had the idea that flying was the worst.
We live in fame or go down in flame. Boy, nothing can stop the Army Air Corps.
Jim didn't stand up that day to become an airman because his mother Pauline didn't want him to. Pauline Armbruster was born in America from French-Canadian parents. Ironically, Jim's father James was born in Germany. James Sr. came to America as a child in the early 1900s.
James Smith was born on June 4th, 1920. He grew up on 567 Grand Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio.
We were Depression children. We were, my sister and I were poor. My father was out of work and tried to find jobs. It was a tough go. And not many kids went to college back in those days.
Jim got accepted to Xavier University in Cincinnati, where he majored in business.
College had an ROTC program, and I was smart enough or lucky enough to sign up way back when I was a freshman. And so as soon as we finished, we went to school, became officers right away. So that's how it happened. When I think back, it was an exciting period of time. I didn't, in my last year at college, I didn't care a thing about my grades. We knew that the big adventure was coming.
He was the top man at his craft, but then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the Army now, a blowing reveille.
Ain't I something? I look pretty good in this uniform, too. Me, little Smitty, who came from the back streets of Cincy, Ohio. Here I am walking down the streets of an army camp. Soldiers salute me. Imagine that? Me? Now I'm out on a drill field, yelling out commands as loud as any old drill sergeant. We'd get out there in the early evening just to practice yelling. Girls. My girl from home visits. Is she ever impressed? She sees soldiers salute me. Wow. We go to a military dance. She sees all those ranks, colonels and generals. She thinks I'm some kind of big shot. All that glamour. She's a nice girl, but I'm not interested in a commitment. I'm here to fight a war. Why, I even passed up a desk job to get into the action. And I'm ready to fight for my country, make it safe for democracy.
We paraded around in our uniforms and the girls all cheered and we hadn't done a thing. Just the service years. And when I first went in the Army, it was wonderful. We had so much fun. It was great.
Immediately after college, Jim went to basic training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is still a key U.S. military base today. He was then sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery school. After that, Jim was sent to a recruiting camp. Here, Jim would experience his happiest time in the Army. He became a platoon battery officer in charge of a group of local new recruits, where he would lead a 3-month basic training course. Jim was promoted to a platoon battery officer thanks to a 50-year-old, 5'0" captain named
Jawbone Smith.
Jawbone?
Jawbone Smith, because he talks so much. He wasn't a relative. He was from the mountains somewhere, and he had no education, and he got into the Army, and by the age of 50, he was as far as he could go.
When the war broke out, Jawbone was too old to go overseas. However, the Army was taking experienced men and making them into officers.
He showed disrespect. He was very crude. He was obnoxious. And I liked him. He had a chip on his shoulder. He was a little guy, and he had a mouthful of teeth that went all different directions. He was a first-class character, and he gave me my platoon when nobody else as a second lieutenant got a platoon, and that platoon was the happiest experience that I had in the Army. When people found out that Jawbone was my captain, they thought, oh, you're in for a terrible time, because he showboated, and yet with me he never did this.
What did I do? I reported, saluted, and stood there for a while. He looked over papers scattered all over his desk. By now, I'm sweating. He looks up like he didn't know I was there, and that tough-looking face broke into a wide, oh so wide, grin. Well now, what was coming? He told me some nice things he heard, then finished with the best.
Smitty, the platoon is yours.
He knew I was happy. I grinned all over. I started by making a few changes each day. At the end of the drills, I lined up the entire platoon at one end of the parade ground. I said, when I say run, we all take off and run as fast as you can to the other end. And I'm going to beat every last one of you. Ready? Run! I had a little jump on them. I ran with all my might, but so did they. First time I came in about 6th place. But as training continued, I was getting in better shape. What I liked was how serious they were. They wanted to beat me. As the fatter soldiers lost weight, I fought to finish in the first half. We laughed and talked. It turned out to be the best part of the day. Fun. We all seemed to feel real close. It was like we were all one, together. Like I was not the boss, just their leader. We ran obstacle courses, took our guns apart, went for long bike rides, shot our rifles. We all laughed when someone got Maggie draws. We put up tents. We used our gas mask and tear gas. The training program got more and more exciting as we got near the end. It got more and more challenging. We all look forward to each day. I know I did. It was great.
After training his platoon, Jim was sad to see his men leave. A new group arrived, but
Jawbone wanted me to stay on. Said he would have me assigned permanently. But I had other plans. My mind was made up. I told Jawbone I've already signed up to go overseas.
Good luck.
He said and turned away. And so, within a week, I was gone. In a month, I was on the troop ship, headed for North Africa.
I wanted to serve. I really wanted to serve. I really thought that we were right. I really thought that, also I had a glorious view of what war would be like. But I was really fighting for my country. I had a glorious view of what war would be like. Combat fatigue, the best way to understand it is dead. Dead, you see dead soldiers. There was this dead Moroccan soldier who had his shoes were taken off. And I passed him every day and he was shrinking, he was frozen. But you know, that weighs on your mind. In Africa, the first hill we were on, there was a whole bunch of troops there. And when on Easter morning, they jumped off against the enemy. And I could see, from the hill, I could see some of my friends, you know, falling down. And no matter how you denied it, you felt that someday that's going to be you. And you can just take so much of this, and it starts to work on you. General Patton made a little landing in Sicily, and I was part of it.
July 1943. For the first time in World War II, U.S. soldiers assault Hitler's forces in Europe.
General George S. Patton's army storms the enemy-held island of Sicily. But just as Patton's forces battle their way inland, massive German Tiger tanks strike back. It's destroy or die as Patton's army goes muzzle to muzzle with the most elite shock troops of Hitler's Third Reich. Flashback, spring 1943. The Allies celebrate their first stunning victory against the Nazis in North Africa. Adolf Hitler's dream of domination over the Mediterranean has been crushed. And 250,000 German and Italian soldiers have been captured. Sicily is only 100 miles from North Africa, and if taken, could provide bases for bombing the German homeland. It's also a stepping stone for an invasion of Italy, and it'll turn up the pressure on the country's infamous dictator, Benito Mussolini.
After joining the war in February 1943 in Casablanca, Jim saw his first battles in Tunisia a few months later. In July 1943, Lieutenant Smith's next mission was part of a historic Allied assault on Sicily. He was part of the U.S. Army landings in Laquita, Sicily, with a bold plan led by the famous General George S. Patton.
The Allies plan a two-pronged assault on Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky. While British forces under Montgomery will hit the southeast coast, Patton's 7th Army will land at 3 vital points along the island's southwestern coast.
In Sicily, Jim was up against approximately 300,000 Italian troops and 75,000 Nazi soldiers.
The largest assault force ever assembled up to July 1943 achieved complete tactical surprise. There was little opposition to the first landing, except near Jalon. Instead of landing where enemy coastal defenses were formidable, we struck where the enemy thought the water too shallow for our craft to unload heavy equipment. Floating causeways, an ingenious method of bridging from ship to shore, made the landings possible. A well-guarded secret, the causeways proved successful under baptism of fire at Sicily. Licata, D-Day objective on the left flank, was taken by the 3rd Division.
Lieutenant Smith was a forward observer for a U.S. Field Artillery Battalion. His mission in Sicily was to crawl, walk, run, or drive in front of his infantry to see what's up ahead. Jim's eyes were in charge of where and if artillery guns should fire down on the enemy.
The combined British and American invasion force totals nearly 160,000 troops, 14,000 vehicles, 600 tanks, and 1,800 pieces of artillery.
Of these 1,800 artillery pieces, Jim could phone in a strike that could include up to 24 artillery guns at a time. Lieutenant Smith and his floating 17th Field Artillery Regiment of the 13th Brigade landed in Sicily. He had no idea of the frantic pace of the war ahead of him.
Patton has met his invasion objectives and is simply standing by, while General Montgomery fights his way north. Thirsting to get his army on the move, Patton flies to Tunisia to Harold Alexander's headquarters and begs the Allied ground commander to let him back into the fight. While Monty fights his way towards Messina from the south, Patton will lead the 7th Army on a dramatic race towards the capital city of Palermo along the northern coast of the island.
Lieutenant Smith took part of this historic sweeping assault through the western half of Sicily. In his stories, Jim wrote that he was always running around in my Jeep, and no one stood still long enough to get organized. His forward observer crew consisted of about 3 or 4 soldiers, including a few wiremen and a radio man. As American troops marched through Sicily fighting Nazis and Italian forces, his orders were to always stay ahead but close to the infantry and report back to headquarters whenever he could. The Allies were winning. The Italian army began to disintegrate as thousands and thousands of Italians surrendered, sometimes with little to no resistance. The Germans were still battling, but they were fleeing to get out of Sicily as fast as they could. Lieutenant Smith said his mission turned into stop the retreat and capture them all. But then things got interesting for Lieutenant Smith. In northern Sicily, the Germans had a successful retreating tactic where they would blow up the roads behind them in the very mountainous terrain, which was slowing down America's pursuit. However, General George Patton created a plan that became known as an end run. In fact, Jim wrote a story titled Patton's End Run, explaining Patton's idea of getting in front of the retreating Germans by using the sea to move ahead of the enemy. Jim said Patton's idea was to take one big landing craft, load it with 4 guns, trucks, and 2 tanks, go around the blasted section of the road, and land them on a quiet beach up ahead. Sounds brilliant. Not so. Of all the gun batteries on the island, mine was chosen. Instead of feeling proud, we all said, why us?
General Patton made a little landing in Sicily, and I was part of it. And we had 2 tanks on this little landing craft. And we were not experienced about getting these tanks into this landing craft. We had a terrible time. And the 2 tanks were sitting there waiting because they would be the last one on the little ship and the first one off. And they helped us, and they laughed and talked with us all night long. And we didn't get away till about 3 o'clock, so when we went to the landing place, it was broad daylight, and the 2 tanks went right off, and our trucks and guns followed. And the first, I can't understand this, but the first gun that came off, of course, where did the truck go? Right down in the sand. And I don't know how we had ever solved this thing. And all this brass was standing there yelling, and I was the first one to realize what had to be done. I had to get one of those tanks to come back. And I ran across the area and got the second tank I ran, I caught up to the tank, I took my rifle and banged on the side of the tank. You know, stop! They couldn't even hear me, so I ran around the front and they stopped and I pointed to the back and they pulled them off. But the first tank was gone down the road. When we got the guns off, the colonel said, Smitty, get in your Jeep and go up ahead, see if you can find the infantry and let us know what's going on. I went up the road. I came around the turn of the road and I saw the tube of a tank facing me. And I knew it was enemy tank. The driver jammed on the brakes and we dove out of the tank, out of the Jeep, went around and tried to use the Jeep as a barrier, you know. And I was starting to get up to hold up my hand to surrender to that tank. Then nothing had happened. And I noticed now that the tube was not aimed at us. It was aimed to the side. So my eyes followed along where that tube was pointing. And here was a tank. Tank was knocked out. The German tank. It's something like a movie. Who would ever think of something like this happening? The two tanks were 20 yards away, and they each had knocked the other one out. See, a tank travels with a shell in at all times. And the only person that knew, I called that a 3-second tank battle. There was a hole in the American tank, right below the tube where the driver would sit, and there was a hole in the German tank, and the German tank was much bigger. And there was still some smell and smoke coming out. I'd say this happened about an hour before I got there.
They had both fired at the same time.
That's right. Yeah. Only way it could have happened. And the only guy that could have done it is the lanyard man. He pulls the lanyard that causes a pin to strike and the shell flies. Well, I went over, and the men in both tanks were laying on the ground. The infantry had gone and pulled them all out to see if there's anybody to save. So I walked along there, and there were 6 guys of ours laying there.
How about a drink of water right now?
They were the 6 guys that had stood there the night before.
This was the tank that had sailed.
That was the first one. That was the first tank.
Yeah.
And they were all laying on the ground there. I even had to, in order to move, my driver was useless. I sent him back. He couldn't drive no more. He was cracked up completely. So I even had to pull some of their bodies a little over so I could go around them and continue up the road. Then as I drove, you know, each turn of the road, my God, you know, I didn't know, maybe they sent a second tank. That German tank was meant to get us and get that ship that was sitting there while they were unloading. That's what Germans had sent that tank, and our little tank had stopped it. And I was thinking, those guys, you know, they should be heroes. But then I had to go on. I went around each bend in the road, scared to death. And I finally found the infantry. Thank goodness I found them first and not the enemy. And here we had George Patton. I ran into Patton.
Oh, you've got to tell me about it.
Oh, yeah.
In a letter to his wife Beatrice, Patton writes, "The war is far from over, but we are going to win it in a big way. I have not the least notion what will happen next time, but I don't care where, when, or who I fight, so long as I keep fighting. It is the greatest of all games."
Jim said Patton was a real stickler about proper uniforms. As a leader, Lieutenant Smith needed to make sure everyone was dressed correctly, and he also needed to stop any disobedient soldiers who didn't respect command and authority.
You know, you have some obstinate soldiers who don't want to be there and don't want to cooperate. Now, when you get them in a war condition, you know, what are you going to do to them? You're going to take away the weekend pass? They don't get no weekend pass. You're going to take away any trip they're going to have? They don't get no trip, none of that. You're going to put them in a stockade? Then they don't have to fight. So, we had a system. We had 4 officers. And what we did is we zeroed in on that guy. The soldiers would be lined up here, and you're going to inspect their guns. Well, I'd step in front of this one guy, and just a cursory look at his gun, but I'd step in front of the guy we were after. And I'd spend 10 minutes standing in front of him, looking him over. Your shoes are dirty, your leggings aren't done right, let me see that rifle. I'd put my finger inside the bolt, come out with a little bit of oil, you know, stand in front of him, stare him down. Because if he gets away with it, the other guys are going to see it. And then there were some guys you just couldn't make change. And that's what leads to General Patton.
Known for his industrial language, Patton's aggression could lead to difficulties. During the 1943 campaign in Sicily, the American general physically attacked 2 shell-shocked men who he believed to be guilty of cowardice.
He even wanted us to wear ties. And we had this kid, and he kept bugging me. He wanted to go with me. See, I was the action guy. They were back at the guns, but I was out front. All the time I was out front, near where the infantry was, or on a mountainside or something. So he kept bugging me, wanted to go with me. So finally I took him, and he was brave to the extreme. I used to tell him, Maria, if you want to get yourself killed, go ahead, but you're going to get us all killed. Anyway, it was a bad night. We were rushing and running around, no sleep, and we were coming back in a Jeep, and he had his shirt open, his leggings off, no helmet on his head, and up over the rise of the road, I see this command car coming with 4 stars on it. You know, Patton had it up in a big sign. And of course, we stopped the Jeep, and all jumped out and stood at attention, but not this Maria. He crawled out of the Jeep, turned around and started walking away. Well, Patton stands up in his command car screaming, "Get that soldier's name! Who is this officer?" And this Maria just keeps on strolling away. And when they say, "Who is his officer?" he points at me. So General Patton didn't come running down, but he sent his aide. His aide was a reasonable guy, you know, and he came over to me, he took my name, but I said, we had a bad night last night, and I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. So he went back and he talked a few words to Patton, and Patton sat down. You might find Patton anywhere. He went all over the place. But I met him. Patton drove away, and I went down to Maria. You're not allowed to hit anybody. But I stood in front of him, and I started screaming. And he just shuffled his shoulder. He says, I know, you know that everybody hates him. Well, we didn't like Patton too much, I'll tell you that.
The war in Sicily was ending. With a decisive Allied victory, U.S. and British forces were charging to the city of Messina as Nazis fought back while fleeing to Italy.
On the 16th, American troops reached the outskirts of Messina, and that night and the next morning, Patton's troops enter Messina a few hours ahead of the British.
After 38 days of fighting, all of Sicily was occupied by the Allies. Although tens of thousands of men lost their lives in Sicily, there was a moment when the fate of one entire town was placed in the palm of Jim's hand.
This is the story The Well,
written by Lieutenant James A. Smith.
My radio man and I sped up the road with no idea what was ahead. And by luck, we did find the foot soldiers. It was so nice riding down this road. It felt like a big shot, riding with all the weapons and armament surrounding me. That was until a very tall, very angry army captain started yelling,
"Get all those damn weapons off that damn Jeep! What would happen if the enemy blew up that Jeep? How could we fight with no guns?"
The thought struck me.
I'd be dead. This guy didn't care about me. Not only that, he was furious with me. He came right up to me, leaned over, almost eyeball to eyeball, and called me some things unprintable.
Later, the angry captain called us over into the woods to get ready to attack up a hill. He turned to me and said,
"I want you with me."
We hid our Jeep and dragged our radio up the hill. The Germans were gone.
Thank God.
I wanted to do a good job, so I climbed up the tree to try to see better into the village below. Well, along came the captain. Very sarcastically, he said,
"Lieutenant, will you get down from that tree? What are you trying to do?"
My answer,
"Yes, sir. I want to crawl under a rock."
"Okay, Lieutenant. Look down into that village. In the village square. That looks like a gun to me."
I looked. I saw what he saw. I wasn't so sure. I said,
"But it's abandoned."
"I want that gun destroyed now!"
My radio man was having trouble with the radio. Finally, after much delay, we made contact with the guns half a mile away. I located the gun on my map. The guns fired one shell. It landed in the village. One poor villager lost his home. Then I corrected, saying,
"You are 100 yards over and 50 yards right."
They made the correction, and the next shell landed in a tiny village square. The smoke, concussion, and dirt actually shook the so-called gun. And now I knew that was not a gun. It was a pole I used to dip for water from the well. It looked like the tube of a gun, but it was not a gun. Now, what I was going to do. Should I call for 12 full guns to fire and destroy the whole village? Should I tell the angry captain and listen to him? So I played it cool and just did nothing. Before the captain could question me, and I knew he would, he received an order through his radio.
"The enemy is retreating very rapidly. Move forward as fast as you can."
So we lost all interest in that gun. Meanwhile, back at the guns, they were just waiting for an order to blast a German gun that had no intention now to blow the village into pieces. So we finally did get through by radio. I told the radio man just to say,
It was a mistake."
I never saw the angry captain again.
Thank goodness. I held this tiny village in the palm of my hand. I could have blown the village to kingdom come, but I did not.
Lieutenant Smith had survived the war in Sicily. The most difficult part of the war lay ahead of him in Italy. But for now, Jim felt victorious as the Italian army surrendered just a few weeks later.
Lieutenant Smith had battled for over a month in Sicily, leaving him with scars that would last forever, both the bad and the good.
Now, 12 guns were ready to unload on that little village. So I remember thinking later on I played God. I just didn't do it. My guns were all loaded, ready to blow that poor village to kingdom come. Remarkable how resilient your body is.
Why didn't you bleed to death?
You're still here? Well, lucky you. Here's all the full stories by Jim that were in this movie if you want to take a screenshot or something to read them. There's a lot more in these. The stories are much longer, and you can see some of Jim's edits too. Don't worry, you'll get a special bonus for waiting through this. And here it is, Jim's high school report card from junior year. And here's one of Jim's stories I didn't have time to do, but he summed it up in a drawing.